of course, how those numbers play out if they make it into the parliament. If they do, it will change the coalition calculations a little bit. So those are the numbers. I want to bring in my guest now, Jackson Janes, who is a senior fellow in residence at the German Marshall Fund, also waiting patiently as we've been talking about all of these numbers. Thank you, Jackson. So what do you think of that breakdown that we were just looking at?
I think it shows Germany like Europe, and Europe is like Germany. It's multifaceted in its political colors, and to some extent, its political flavors politically. And that's something that I think we've seen reflected here in the breakdown of not only the CDU leading, but the AfD picking up votes, SPD, and on down. When I first started coming to Germany many years ago, there were only 4 parties in the Bundestag. Now there are 8. So it's a sign of the times that the political atmosphere in Germany is evolving.
A fracturing of the political landscape, if you will. What do you think of the message that we've heard from Friedrich Merz tonight, who has said, this is a success for us, and we need to get going as quickly as possible. The work starts tomorrow.
Well, I think that's the reason that it really was so important to say to people who really up until about a week ago didn't know who they were going to vote for.
Yeah.
And there's a great deal of nervousness and anxiousness about the future. Think about it: economy, war in the neighborhood, and immigration problems that are unsolved. And I think a lot of people felt that they were sort of uncertain as to whether or not any team could put together solutions that would be useful. And now they've taken their choice, and we'll see what they can do with it.
What is your reading of the far right, nearly getting 20%, about a doubling of their past result? What do you chalk that up to?
Signs of the times. In other words, It's another indication of people feeling lack of trust and lack of confidence in the institutions, let alone the people. And that's happening all over Europe, and by the way, at a great deal in North America.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Jackson, if you look at the priorities, as we see the numbers on the screen again, the priorities for the new government, we've talked about the fact that, there are a lot of countries looking to Germany as a leader in Europe. Why, or what do you think are the biggest priorities for this next government?
Well, it has to be domestic as well. I mean, there's economic
Yes.
problems that are staring them in the face. I think also they've got to figure out a way to deal with this immigration issue, because that's fanning the fumes of a lot of problems within the society. But I think instilling confidence in the government that up until really not too long ago, Germans assumed that things would work, like trains. And
the trains don't work that well, by the way.
Reliable. And I think that there's just a sort of lack of confidence in the future that this particular administration now has to grab with both hands.
So if we look at how the rest of Europe is looking to Germany, we also need to talk about the U.S. And we were just talking about, or with our correspondent, rather, Nick, at the AfD headquarters, about the fact that we saw this pretty astonishing speech by J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, at the Munich Security Conference, talking about breaking down firewalls. Elon Musk holding an event with Alice Weidel on X, formerly Twitter. What impact, if any, do you think that had?
I don't think it had that much. I was there. I heard that speech. I think that was a speech that was directed not only at the German audience in front of him, but at certain people back home, one of which was in the White House. But I think that to some extent they're talking about the fact that they've got to deal with people who feel outside the system. They don't feel as if they're getting their responses that they're looking for. And I think the other thing is that that particular effort on the part of people that are elsewhere, let's look at it in Hungary, in other countries in Europe, feel this across borders. This is not something that's unique to Germany. The AfD is very similar to other developments in different countries in Europe. And I think that's something that we have to pay attention to figure out what's the roots of these frustrations and to some extent the grievances that we see coming up through these parties, and to some extent asking for more attention.
I want to ask you about some of the interesting numbers we saw on the screen in the exit poll results, namely the far left, Linke, coming in surprisingly almost at 9%, if we're looking at the numbers again here. I mean, they experienced a pretty big boost, partly because of their chancellor candidate, Heidi Reicheneck, who was very successful on TikTok. But how do you explain that?
Well, you just said it, TikTok. In
Right.
other words, she
Yeah.
was this sparkling personality that came out of really nowhere in the sense of putting together a party that had been run by a lot of older men, if I can put it that way,
Yeah.
that were running the party. And I think that she just added some juice. But it's also an indication that people want more from a political system, more from political institutions, and more from political leaders to address what they think is important to them. And so in some ways, it doesn't surprise me, but it's just another indication of how the evolution of the political system is broadening out. And the only problem with that is that you don't want it to broaden out so that it's only on the extremes. It should be in the middle as well and keeping the center strong.
You talked about these patterns we're seeing across Europe, but how much do you see this result also as a referendum on Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the government that collapsed?
No question. I mean, there was a great deal of bickering and a great deal of wasting time, and to some extent even personal problems that either party could be blamed for. But at the same time, I think that the issue is, again, that Germans feel like it's not just this particular coalition. It's a larger set of problems. There are many, many things happening all at once, whether it's the climate, whether it's the war, whether it's the economy, and even strange voices coming out of North America. So I think that to some extent there's going to be a real need on this part of the new government, whatever it's going to continue to look like, to grab hold of that that anxiety and try to channel it so that they can have the feeling that they're making progress.
All right, Jackson. Well, as always, really, really good to get your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on BBC News. And just as we've been looking, of course, at the various party headquarters and listening to the messages